everyone. My name is Tara Ruttley. I work for NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C., and my title officially is Associate Chief Scientist for Gravitational Research. I'm having a great time up in DC after I spent my first 19 years as a career scientist and engineer down at the NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston, where most of my career has been focused on things happening on the International Space Station. Now, the first 10 years of my career on the space station was in the engineering directorate at Johnson, where I was the lead for exercise equipment development, some of the exercise equipment, and all of the medical hardware used by astronauts on the International Space Station. The second half of my career, so the last 10 years or so, I've been what was called Associate Chief Scientist for the International Space Station, which means I worked in the Space Station Science Office, which is a little tiny organization of scientists in a big engineering organization called the International Space Station. My role in the Space Station Science Office at the Johnson Space Center was to work with scientists on the ground to ensure that their experiments on the International Space Station were completed and then communicated. And then we worked to really keep up with the results that were happening on the International Space Station. And the question I get a lot about why we do research on the International Space Station is basically, why don't we do things experimentally on Earth? Why do we even need to do things in space? And that one big component and difference is gravity. We do experiments in space because there's no gravity vector in orbit, in low Earth orbit. And so that means that as scientists, you can learn a whole lot of new things about your experiment that you might not even otherwise have a clue about here on Earth. On Earth, we can predict how fluids behave. We can predict things like sedimentation or buoyancy-driven convection, or how fluids and hot air and cold air mixes, because that's all based on what we know about gravity. We do this stuff every day. But you get into space, at least in low Earth orbit, and those things are not so intuitive. Those things change. And when you have changes in those kinds of systems, you see behavior changes in the experiments that you design. So fire behaves differently. Water behaves differently. It climbs walls. It doesn't just sit in the bottom of your cup. You may have seen those videos. Even things in the human body changes. Your muscles and bone will change because they don't necessarily need gravity anymore to work. So if your body's really gonna not use it, it's gonna get rid of it. It's really use or lose. Things in the immune system change, things in the nervous system change. So we really use the International Space Station as a big experimental platform. It's a big laboratory, 250 miles above our heads. So we do things there because we can't do them on Earth. But it's not just to advance basic science, which is an enough reason of itself, but it's also to advance us going beyond low Earth orbit to be able to live on the moon longer and even go to Mars. So when we're talking about things like testing new technology or getting the human body understood in a way that we can address any issues that allow us to live beyond low Earth orbit, that's what we use the space station for as well. So the astronauts are very busy up there. They usually stay 6 months at a time or longer, maybe up to a year. And they're from all over the world. We have partners from Japan and Canada and Europe and Russia and everywhere in between that partners with us to go to space. Now we're really, really excited because just on May 27th, in a few days, we're going to have a launch to the International Space Station for 2 astronauts right here off of American soil on a SpaceX vehicle. So NASA's partnered with Contract SpaceX to do this. And so we're really excited because the last time we've had that kind of a launch with humans on board have been since 2011. So since then, our astronauts have been getting to the space station with by riding with our Russian colleagues on the Soyuz rockets for the past 10 years or so. So it's been a great partnership, but we're really excited to now have our own access once again to the International Space Station so that we continue the good things that we're doing on board. So one of the questions that I get a whole lot, and some of the ones that came in for this event, were how is it that you do both engineering and science at NASA? And that goes back to my childhood, and a brief story is that I've always wanted to work for NASA ever since I was in about 3rd grade. And one year in high school, my physics class took a field trip to the Johnson Space Center, which is about a 3-hour drive away. And in my mind, I'd always wanted to do science. I just really preferred science over engineering. When I got to the Space Center, I asked an astronaut, what does it take to be an astronaut? Because I thought maybe I could be one. And what do I need to do? And he said, well, wow, that's great. Not everybody gets to be an astronaut, though. We don't select a whole many. And so the ones we do select, we select because they have enjoyed what they've done in their own careers, and they've had a lot of enjoyment, which means a lot of success, and you get really good at what you do. He said, so he recommended that you just do what you love and the rest will come. And so that's what I did. I did what I loved, and I went into the field of science. So my undergraduate degree was a bachelor's in biology. And while I was working on my biology degree, though, I was working with a group of mechanical engineering students who I got to know pretty well. And when I realized there were some ideas I had for exercise equipment for use in space, just even as a student, I realized I needed the help of engineers to bring my ideas to life, to something usable. And the more I worked with those engineers, the more I participated in the development and design and was present in the machine shop. They suggested that I actually go and take the next step, which is to get a mechanical engineering master's degree. But I had already had my mind set on neuroscience PhD because that was really my real interest. I was going to go and get a PhD in neuroscience. But it turns out they were right. I actually took their advice and applied for the mechanical engineering master's program at Colorado State University and enjoyed it, had a blast. And at the end of that, I submitted my resume to NASA, and they hired me specifically because I had both a biology background and a mechanical engineering background. And they had just opened up a new division called the Biomedical Systems Division, in which they needed someone to help manage the exercise equipment and lead the medical equipment that was being used by the astronauts on the space station. And the mix of my background allowed me to have a really good communication process with between the flight surgeons who were making the medical requirements for what the astronauts needed and the engineers who were developing the hardware to meet those requirements. So that's how I started out at NASA. At the same time as I was working as an engineer, which I never thought I would do, I pursued a PhD in neuroscience at the University of Texas Medical Branch. So I did both at the same time. And once I completed my PhD degree, that's when I decided it was time to go back to science. And that's how I ended up in the Space Station Science Office, right when the space station was done being assembled and was getting ready to ramp up the science. So it was a super exciting time. And my entire career, again, has been focused on the space station and low Earth orbit, which I feel like I'm like a space station hugger. And now that I'm at headquarters in DC, I'm still engaged in space station activities. But now I'm getting a brand new insight into the moon, lunar science, things that are going to happen on the moon when people go back to the moon, how we take knowledge gained from the space station and apply it to the moon and then Mars. So it's a really super fun time to be at NASA. I've been saying that actually for the last 19 years. It's just a really fun place to be. We're a really great family. If you have an interest in working for NASA, it doesn't matter where your interest lies. I think you've probably heard that there's room for everybody. There's a need for artists and communication specialists and lawyers and business experts and economists, scientists and engineers, administrative professionals, human resources, logistics of maintaining a center. It's just a wide range. So we encourage everyone to consider joining the team. It's exciting now as we go beyond low Earth orbit to the moon and to Mars. And I'm looking forward to the next decade or two that I'm still a part of NASA, and I'm looking forward to having those of you who are interested join me. And I will see you out there at Higher Orbits events. I've met a couple of you, and I have faith in this generation after having met with and worked with many of you, and I hope to meet more of you soon.